Dr. Castleberry here with the penultimate, if not final, episode of our Week 3 video lecture, Column 2 and 1-3, Communication and Cultural Change. This week, our questions seem to zero in on the theme of semiotics as it relates to media culture and to social influence, as well as how we can understand semiotics best through the lens of genre studies. And we're using this by genre in this course as opposed to being used by it to examine that. And some of the readings reflect the 007 franchise, and thus your questions reflect some of those media texts as well. We were engaging questions with Chris, and Chris has a question about oppositions in props functions, table 3.2 of Berger's Median Society on page 48. And to add a little bit of extra information there, Berger is drawing from Vladimir Propp, who is was a sociologist slash linguist slash you could definitely classify him as a genre theorist. Perhaps that sort of interdisciplinary nature of the areas he contributes to, there is a clear synthesis, a clear connection to the kind of work Propp is known for. But I was able to track down a copy of one of Propp's more prominent works, Morphology of the Folktale. And typically this is one of the earliest works referenced by scholars of genre theory. And so in this, Propp gives very much what we will call more of a traditional structuralist take on genre analysis, okay? And so he breaks it into a great many points, and that is all well and good. It's very categorizable. It's highly detailed. And at the same time, that type of analysis definitely takes quite a bit of concentration, as opposed to the question that asked if, and it may not have even been Chris's, but so I think someone asked if I could perform a quick proper Proppian analysis, or whatever you would call that, and my answer is no, I cannot perform a quick one. I cannot even answer a question quickly. So but to follow up on Chris's thoughts here, semiotics have to have an opposite to become something warm and cold. Why does a hero have to be the opposite of the villain? And what is it called if they are comparable in every way but good and bad? I feel like we see this in films such as, for example, American Gangster, director Ridley Scott. And he, in American Gangster, he kills, I assume we're talking about the Denzel Washington gangster lead. He kills but buys kids Christmas dinner. So what is up with that? That's confusing. Oh, very nice. Okay, so what's going on with it's kind of a co-lead picture, right? You get two perspectives, if I recall. I've seen American Gangster years ago, but you get one protagonist in the form of Russell Crowe's kind of sloppy, disorganized, disheveled police investigator type, right? And then you have Denzel Washington's character. He is the aforementioned American Gangster, but he's also a community organizer. Okay, so he's doing these things that call into question the nature of the character as villain, and I think we see this throughout literature at times, because it's indicative of real life. Okay, so Washington in some ways resembles the sympathetic villain, right? Or another way to read the sympathetic villain, or its reverse, would be the tragic hero. Okay, so someone that is good but is ultimately befuddled by some poor choices along the way, that sort of thing. And this is where we get at the most important term to answer that question for Chris. What we're talking about ultimately is the concept of the anti-hero figure. And the anti-hero is prominent in popular culture right now. We've seen a surge in the last 15 to 20 years with the likes of Tony Soprano sort of headlining The Sopranos. You've seen this type of figure played with in Breaking Bad, where you have Walter White, who is a sympathetic figure, initially, some more of that tragic hero, but then there is a de-evolution, right? He devolves into the underworld of crime, and he emerges the other side a would-be crime lord. Okay, and so the issue then is, where does your sympathy lie once a character takes on a negative transformational journey? We see these types of characters recur in popular culture, and an important question then is to pause and consider, why now, right? And what are they representing? Right? They're not just telling interesting stories. What are they representing? What's going on there? Sons of Anarchy, another anti-hero drama in recent years to play with those tropes, those conventions, okay? Making the unlawful type of person the point where you want to root. Some of you are writing about The Americans right now, a spy drama in which from the initial pilot episode asks you to sympathize with the quote-unquote enemy, Russian spies living in suburban America. Spoiler alert. But you get that immediately in the opening of the pilot, and that is a show that's playing with its audience, right? The audience is engaging in this tug of war, and it's essential that we are wrestling with what is happening on screen, because it's a text intended to activate some reflexivity. Okay, so those are series that come to mind in that respect. Mad Men was magnificent for presenting a lot of male figures and masculine practices that borderline on horror for some viewers, sort of unethical behaviors that recur so frequently, it calls the text itself into question. But ultimately, in the deeper you assess it, there is a bit of an indictment on its era, as well as a touch of nostalgia for its era. So it is like Marie Antoinette, wanting the viewer to have their cake and eat it too, I suppose. All right. Glenister Roberts, the Communication Theory in Millennial Popular Culture, talks about a horse not having anything to do with the animal. It is just a name we've given to it. Very, very well, the horse could have been called Mud. We see differences in cultures, from fashion to words, to word meanings. But what makes American cinema so popular to other cultures when the semiotics probably don't have the same meaning? And here would be the immediate response to that question. Cinema is first, okay? So in the pecking order of what it represents, cinema is first a visual language. It's a visual language that tells stories about the human condition. And so oftentimes what we find in film, in cinema, is they are telling the kinds of human stories that transcend borders, that transcend languages, right? That transcend cultural norms. Because if we can get at core aspects of the human condition, then we are telling a story that, while culturally contextual, can transcend culture. All right, and that's from the auteur films all the way over to the sloppy sequels and, action extravaganzas. There's a reason the superhero film has not burned out yet. Normal genre cycles go through lull phases. Arguably, the superhero picture blockbuster should have phased out a little bit, and in some ways it has not. And this is because not only is it continuing to find ways to innovate and experiment with the form, but it's telling universal stories. All right? It's using the superhero signs and symbols to tell stories about the human condition. At least that's sometimes their goal, right? Other times it's just to make a bunch of noise, and it's super shiny and good looking. So we will go to that. And the story never ends because they give you multiple scenes during and after the credits. We'll table that for now, but that is definitely a topic to revisit at a later date. Okay. Yes, that's right. Okay. Jonathan has a question coming from Burgers Media and Society. Again, the Vladimir prop section, table 3.2, on the nature of narratives. Props functions, functional analysis. I think I've heard it referred to that before they kind of changed the name. So there you go, signs and symbols. We change the names of theories too when it suits us, when they need updating, when they need specification. Based on this table, it just said about movies where the villain is the one we're cheering for, and for example, Law-Abiding Citizen. Does his theory still hold ground in this type of text? Well, first and foremost in entertainment, we are typically pulling for who the producer of the text, the rhetor of the text, if you will. It's a breadcrumb. We typically pull for who they intend us to pull for. All right? And then when we don't, it's because of some other factor, right? Most likely either a lack of familiarity with the conventions of the text itself, or the context rather of the narrative, or because we're over-identifying with someone. I notice this young children tend to over-identify with characters that even could be villains because that specific character feels like a closer association to them. And not because of the villain qualities, but because of perhaps gender qualities. Perhaps because of right, sort of age qualities. You think of something like there's a whole generation of children that watched the Star Wars prequels before they watched the original series. And there was, until you get to Revenge of the Sith, the character of Anakin Skywalker requires the audience sympathy. And you had like a generation of young people identifying, if not over-identifying with this character. We're not talking about the older fans. We're not talking about the smart marks, right? We're not talking about the critics that know everything. We're talking about the casual fans that really take this text in. And what do you do with someone you over-identify with, and then they become something sort of repelling or repulsive or villainous? That's tricky business, right? And how do you shepherd that? Culturally, what does that mean? And I think these issues are not only important to talk about, it's a reason we should study that and understand how the power of stories, the power of storytelling, the power of myths, the power of myth making, that's the power of signs and symbols, and ultimately the utility, the usefulness of semiotics. Remember the telephone game? There was a bunch of friends who would gather in a circle, whisper something to the person next to him, and then that person would do the same. By the time it went through, everybody had taken on a new definition, new plot, new words were changed, and so on. In a sense, the potential evolution of signs could very much resemble the telephone game. Yes, Chris is onto it. Cultural theorists call this process reappropriation, okay? And this is something definitely people theorize about, but I am digging this telephone game metaphor. I think that's a strong addition to our conversation, and a great way to hold on to that idea and think more about it. All right, final thoughts on this week coming up shortly. See you in a moment.